So this is Scrum Under Waterfall. I am Benjamin Day, based out of Brookline, Massachusetts, which is basically Boston. I do training, consulting, coaching around TFS and Scrum, software process, especially software testing. Software testing is one of my specialties. And it's to the point that my wife could probably teach a class on test-driven development. She is sick to death of hearing about test first versus not test first versus yada, yada, yada. I speak at a bunch of different conferences, Tech Ed, VS Live, Dev Teach, write articles that are out there. I've got my blog, benday.com. Benday@benday.com is my email. Feel free to send me messages. And then also I'm at benday on Twitter, so if you want to heckle me while I'm on stage, go to town. Actually, I have been saying that lately in presentations that I give, and it backfired a little while ago. I was like, yeah, go ahead and heckle me. It's going to be cool. It'll be fine. And I finished up my talk, and then somebody that was in my audience came up and he's like, yeah, I've been heckling you the whole time. And I went and looked. I'm like, oh, my God, this was horrific. So remember, it's a public forum, and it lasts forever. All right. So my slides aren't advancing here. 2 shameless plugs. Buckle up or cover your ears. They'll be over fast. Scrum, plug number 1, Scrum.org. So Scrum.org, you may have seen their logo in various places throughout the day. They have a bunch of different classes that help teams adopt Scrum, learn Scrum, know how to do it. I teach a couple of these different classes. If you'd like to take a wild guess at what their website is, it is, there you go. So check that out. Second plug is benday.com/training. I do training for a living. Feel free to offer me money. I like it. It's good. So, shameless plugs are over. Handful of introductory thoughts. So, when I'm talking about waterfall, I'm basically talking about plan-driven. Okay? So I'm thinking about Gantt charts. I'm thinking about start dates and end dates. Phases, requirements, all that kind of stuff. Make sense? Anyone actually doing waterfall right now? It's okay, you can admit it. All right. I will try to not abuse you too badly throughout the rest of the 75 minutes. So I'm going to abbreviate Scrum under waterfall as SUW. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking of either Agile or Scrum with a plan-driven process. Okay? Handful of assumptions on this. One of them is that Scrum under waterfall actually exists. So it's like one of those myths. It's like the Loch Ness Monster or something. Does it really actually exist? Yes. Forrester actually presented earlier in the day. And if you saw the numbers that Mike had in his talk, it kind of looks like 65% of the world is doing either waterfall or some combination of Scrum plus waterfall. So there's a lot of people out there. And I'm guessing by the number of people that said that they do waterfall that this is not going to be a big deal, but I'm also assuming for the purpose of this talk that Agile and Scrum has been settled, that it's a good thing. Okay? Anyone want to like step up and say Agile and Scrum is absolutely stupid and I hate it and it should die? Anyone want to tone it back a little bit? Like assuming that that's like that's the 11 on hatred of Agile processes. Does anyone want to say that they're an 8? Wow, this is a pretty good Agile room. Is anyone actually paying attention to me right now? Okay, a couple people. Okay, so the Chaos Manifesto, I believe this is a Standish group. I'm pretty sure that's the name. They do a whole bunch of different research about project management and running software projects. And they have this interesting slide from their 2011 release, which is talking about the number of challenge projects and failed projects based on whether or not you're doing waterfall or Agile. And it's kind of amazing that the number of failed projects in the Agile space is 9% versus 29% in the waterfall space. That's a pretty amazing improvement. So that's part of what I'm pushing when I'm thinking that Agile and waterfall is, that Agile and Scrum are actually a good thing and it's worth doing. And that perhaps waterfall is not entirely all it's cracked up to be. Which leads into a lot of what I'm going to talk about across the rest of the talk, is that Scrum under Waterfall, while it may exist, it's a difficult place to be. It's not exactly perfect. And to quote a leading project management expert, you can drive with your feet, doesn't mean it's a good idea. That's paraphrased. It was slightly less family-oriented when he did it in the original place. But I think it really sums up what it's like. There's a lot of difficulties in doing Scrum under a waterfall. And yet companies seem to want to do it anyway. It's kind of a reality of life. So just keep that in mind. Which goes into the next thing of, if your company is thinking of doing Scrum under a waterfall or is already doing Scrum under a waterfall, what are your options? Right? Like as developers, let's just say that it tends to work out this way, that developers are more Agile-centric. They like Agile because it really makes sense in our day-to-day job. So if you're in a Scrum under Waterfall organization, option number one, quit and protest and get a new job at some place that's all Agile, or recognize that people are paying you to work, and if they want to do some combination of Waterfall and Agile, you kind of have to, well, go with it or leave. But what's important to us, and this is a lot like a surgeon making recommendations to their patient, or like medical researchers like trying to get you to participate in some sort of a test of a new drug, there's a lot of informed consent that has to go into this. So if you think about what the Scrum Master is doing a lot of times in the Scrum process, it's a lot of educating the people that are above them in management or whatever about the trade-offs of what they're actually doing. Oh, you want me to do this? Well, yes, we could do this, but perhaps there's going to be this problem. So here is the exact same thing going on here, that from inside of your organization, you can start to push change by helping them make some informed decisions about Scrum under Waterfall. As you can probably guess, I am incredibly practical. So I am not one of the, agilistas that's like ready to fight to the death about whether or not we're going to do X, Y, or Z. I'm very practical. It's about getting some software out the door and trying to see both sides. Because a lot of times there are reasons why organizations want to go waterfall. Now, a lot of it has to do with comfort level, but it also has to do with, even if they want to change over to Agile and Scrum, and they're a large organization, it's going to take a little while to get that organization to change. So has anyone gone through a waterfall to Scrum conversion? Okay, Chad, I'm guessing that you would have. Okay. How did it go? Anyone want to say anything about, pain points that you ran into?
One of the challenges was a lot of legacy code what we had.
The legacy code? Yeah.
That was the biggest challenge, like doing test-driven development with legacy code.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great one, because Scrum and Agile tends to, test-driven development and unit testing is not really, it's decided. It's definitely good. And in waterfall organizations, a lot of times that looks to them like it's extra stuff that they can cut out of the schedule and ship earlier. And yeah, you're laughing because you know that it doesn't really work out that way. You end up with you have the same number of problems and bugs, you just find out about it at the end of your life cycle, in that big fat testing phase at the end of your project that now suddenly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because you're finding more and more and more bugs. So, all right, so let's talk about some comparisons and motivations here. How am I doing so far? Talking too fast? Too slow? Screaming? Okay. Just boring you to tears? All right. All right, so let's compare Waterfall and Scrum. So one of the big ones is requirements documents. So in Waterfall, we're writing, big tomes that no one ever looks at that gets fed from one phase to the next phase. Where in Scrum Agile, we've got, just enough to actually do our work. And if you've read that was it User Stories Applied? I'm forgetting who the author is. One of the things they actually say in that book is that a user story is just a reminder to have a discussion about a requirement. So rather than writing all that stuff down, reminder to actually do it. And part of why we in the Scrum Agile world don't write the requirements documents is that we recognize that we're going to have quite a bit of change. And a lot of that change is going to come from getting customer feedback. So waterfall world, like let's think about software that the FAA is writing, for example. They contract with some vendor, let's say Computer Associates. They had huge contracts with them for a long time. And they kind of just say, all right, Computer Associates, here's what I want. Here's this big requirements document. We'll see you at the phase boundaries. Do a good job. We'll see you later. So customer involvement in that case is a lot more episodic. It doesn't happen every single day. Whereas in Scrum Agile, we consider that to actually be a dysfunction. So if the product owner is not available for you, it's an actual known dysfunction called disengaged product owner. We need the teams need to be able to talk to product owners as soon as possible, iterate designs with them, iterate all kinds of thoughts, negotiate what the scope of those requirements actually are, fun stuff like that. Next up is the big one, the fact that you actually have a start to finish project plan. Now, even if you have that, this just always blew my mind, like when I was working on teams that we managed out of Microsoft Project, it's almost instantaneously garbage. It's like the plan is great right up until the war starts, and then it just flies into 1,000 pieces. In Scrum Agile, we're doing a product backlog, and then we plan basically for the next 30 days for the sprint that we're in, and we only have the fuzziest idea of what we're going to do beyond that. And pretty much anything beyond that sprint boundary is completely up for change. Whereas in Waterfall, we kind of say, here's all the things we want to do. We're going to do them in this order, and we're going to do them on these dates. Sure you are. Another one, assign tasks versus the team just swarms on top of whatever the things are in your sprint backlog to achieve the sprint goal. So I tend to think that if you're assigning tasks to someone inside of Scrum, that it's perhaps an indication that you're bottlenecking on people and that maybe your team is actually going to perform better if you can get away from pre-assigning tasks. Waterfall, assign tasks. Team size changes. You know, if you've got really, really huge teams, that tends to be more of a waterfall thing. Scrum has a fairly small team size. Multiple phases that eventually will deliver software, as opposed to Scrum, we're delivering software at the end of the sprint. So it's all about delivering working software in 30 days or less. In Waterfall, we've got those phases, and we may or may not deliver anything that's usable at the end of those phases. You know, phase number 1 might be requirements gathering. We gather requirements and ship requirements at the end. Not really very usable. So you have that delayed ability to actually start using the software in a waterfall process. So there's a big change in how you actually think about delivery. And then getting down to the really, really important stuff is how we deal with change. So in Scrum, change is a feature. And in Waterfall, change is a bug. So we're expecting that we're going to change how we're going to do our work inside of the sprint. That's going to change almost on a day-to-day basis. A lot of that is coming out of reviewing the sprint goal inside of your daily stand-up. In Waterfall, we've got those dates on there. We've figured out our project plan. If our project plan has to change, it's an indication that the plan's bad, right? So that's a problem. And then we have the contract negotiation at the bottom. So Waterfall, you spec out what you're supposed to deliver. You write a contract that says we're going to deliver this. You're off and running. Contracts in Scrum projects are a little bit, well, let's say vague. Anyone else want to throw anything on there? All right. So why Waterfall? And I'm glad that not that many people are doing Waterfall, because I was really afraid that I was going to be so super negative about Waterfall for 75 minutes and that people are going to be miffed about it. Like, hey man, I do Waterfall and it's awesome. So let's proceed with ripping on Waterfall. So one thing is that it comes naturally to people. Like it goes down super easy. It's like corn syrup or something. What am I talking about? I was listening on NPR to a thing yesterday about just sugar, and there's this guy that was saying, I just wrote this book on sugar, and I think that sugar should be regulated like alcohol and medicine and all this other stuff. I'm like, yeah, that'll work. I'm just seeing like people writing prescriptions for their kids to get a candy bar out of the vending machine or something like that. Anyway, back to Waterfall. Comes naturally. So we tend to think of software as like a manufacturing process. So if we're building a house or we're contracting with someone to build a house, we have an empty plot of land. They're going to dig a hole for the foundation. They're going to do the foundation. They're going to build some kind of a frame on top of that. Some point down the line, they're going to start putting in plumbing, electrical. Since it's our house, it's going to have land in it. Walls, roof, all that kind of stuff. And that all has to go in a certain order. And it feels like in software that we should be able to repeat that same thing. That if we just think about what our application is about, and we think about it rigorously enough and long enough, hard enough, that we will be able to come up with a plan for delivering software that is just as easy to follow and easy to understand as building a house. So it tends to be false, but it feels like we should be able to do that. It also feels really good because we've got dates on this. So we've got dates on the schedule, so we're guaranteed to deliver this thing, right? It's going to be awesome. It's going to be fantastic. What could possibly go wrong? Also makes managers feel really good because, well, if you're doing Scrum, where's the role for the project manager? It doesn't really exist. There's not really a project manager in Scrum. Waterfall, project managers are super important. So it pins down what's supposed to be built, and the idea is that we're going to minimize what we don't know, so we have everything all planned out, and then we just run with it. And it's going to be great, and we'll run that 24-month project, and we'll deliver right on time. Customer's going to be thrilled. Why Scrum and Agile? Well, we kind of know as software practitioners that there's tons and tons and tons of uncertainty. Like, I'm pretty good at my job, but if you ask me to estimate something, I'm almost always wrong. And it never takes less time. You ever notice that? It always takes more. So part of Scrum Agile is figuring out that we just don't know. We can have this requirements document that says exactly what we're supposed to build, but then when you actually go to build it, you're like, I really don't understand what this means. What is it? This could be interpreted 600 different ways. Because the problem is that requirements documents are written in English or any other human language, and there's a lot of variability in human language. What we're trying to do as software professionals is to take that human language and turn it into a script that something as dumb as a computer can just run at light speed. Really hard to do that, and there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity in it. So in Scrum Agile, we're also doing an empirical process, so we're looking at capturing data for how we've done so far. And one of the big things that's changed in Scrum.org's Scrum Guide is getting away from the word commitment and getting into forecast. So how many of you have heard forecast versus commitment? Okay, all the Scrum.org people. So we've been saying for a long time in Scrum that the team is doing their sprint planning in order to commit to what they're going to deliver at the end of that sprint. What has recently sort of changed in the Scrum org community is that we're really trying to move towards using the word forecast. We are forecasting, we're predicting, very much like we would have a weatherman predicting what the weather's going to be in 4 days. We're trying to forecast what we're going to deliver, but it is not a guarantee that we're definitely going to do this. So I guess it makes us even more weaselly as Agile people. We're not going to commit to delivering anything in particular. We're just going to sort of go and sit in front of our computers and check stuff in to source control, and yeah, you get what you get. Thanks a lot. We'll see you later. All right. And also, it's all about self-organization by the people actually doing the software. So if you think about the project plan in Waterfall, it's generated by people that are probably not going to write that code. What could possibly go wrong with that, right? Has anyone ever seen a company that was Agile at the top and Waterfall at the bottom? No. So what does this tell us about the relationship between the two groups? Any particular motivations that might be there? I'll just
want to manage.
It's all about managing. So part of that management stuff is no, that's the end of my slides.
Just refresh it.
Okay. Part of that is making sure that the management people have the data to actually go and do the work. So this starts to get at why Scrum under Waterfall is kind of interesting to a lot of organizations, is that you feel like you have information about how to actually, how your stuff is actually going in your software development process. Additionally, how many managers actually trust their team? In Scrum, I think that the trust factor is actually fairly high. But if you're in a Scrum under Waterfall organization, there's oftentimes not a lot of trust. Or if you're in a Waterfall organization, the people that are doing the project management tend to think of the developers as just a bunch of incompetent boobs. And then the reverse of that is also true, that we're like, yeah, whatever the pointy-haired boss says, sure, sounds great. So let's get into why each party thinks that the other people either group is nuts. Man, is someone going to have an epileptic seizure because it's blinking like that?
Check your cable plugged in.
Yeah, it didn't really help.
I'll play AV guy.
Okay,
This is fine.
You just have to hold it.
just hold it. But anyway,
So did I do it?
yeah, okay. That helps. Just kick it as hard as you can. Yeah, it's a $4,000 laptop. Just hit it. All right. So Waterfall people tend to think of us as just a bunch of crazy hippies, pot-smoking hippies wearing their Birkenstocks all day long, talking about, well, we'll deliver when we deliver. It's like, hey, man, let's just hang out and let's do some software. It's going to be awesome. Software in 30 days, dude. So we're not doing ourselves any favor of being perceived like that. So we've got a bit of a political messaging problem. So Waterfall people will ask us for estimates. We'll give them estimates, and the estimates are always wrong. So they're always staring at us like, why are they always late? They always tell me I'm going to be done on Thursday, and then 5 Thursdays from now, it still is nowhere. And when they actually get it done, it still has 58,000 bugs in it. So, I had this awesome plan. It was all taken care of. We were going to be done on time, and the freaking developers just ruined it. They wrote all this terrible code. There's no tests. It's unmaintainable. It's a disaster, yada, yada, yada. But their thought on it is that it's complex work, and it's too complex to not plan it, which kind of rings. Like, it's a really complicated thing that you're trying to do. How do you actually manage that complexity? So let's flip it to the other side. Part of why we in the Agile space think the Waterfall people are nuts is that the plan is largely imposed. So does anyone know the term voluntold? Yeah. So I have a friend who spent about 10 years in the Navy, and he told me about this term voluntold. I'm like, that is awesome. And the way that he described it to me was that one of his superiors came and assembled a bunch of sailors, and they're tooling around and on a boat somewhere on deployment, and they're like, we need 10 volunteers to go volunteer for infantry duty in Iraq. You're going to be embedded with the Army for the next 2 years. And the point that came up next was like, we need volunteers to do that. But everyone knew that if they didn't actually volunteer, that they were going to be voluntold. And basically, it's like, okay, I am volunteering you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And that's kind of what's happening with that project plan. It's like, What's that estimate on that task going to be? 85 hours. You've got 20. Okay. Voluntold. So basically what we told them was absolutely bogus. We don't know. I mean, even if we're doing Agile, we still have no idea. Our estimation is just sort of, group planning with planning poker, and it's still can be wildly off. But it's the best that we can actually try to do. And what's frustrating for us when they are voluntolding us on estimation is that we didn't really have anything that we could look at to estimate in the first place. And part of why we were reluctant to give them the estimates in the first place is that we're thinking that it's too complex to plan. So it's almost the mirror image of what they were thinking about us. So our first point of agreement is that we're nuts. Second point of agreement is that if it's worth doing, it's probably complex. So they're thinking it's too complex to not plan. We're thinking it's too complex to plan. And at least we agree on the fact that it's complex. Any questions so far while we're jiggling wires? Okay. How's the recording coming through? Is it fine? Okay.
Recording's fine.
Did it work? So he unplugged my phone, and I was like, it would be amazing if just unplugging the audio jack on my phone, it's like, everything's great.
We wonder if it's a grounding problem. That's why.
What happens if I pull my... Good. So let's see how much battery I have left. 88%. I think I'll do okay. I'm going to make it halfway through my demos, and they're just going to... Well, anyway, thanks a lot for coming, kids. Okay, so now that I've run my mouth about it for a while, let's talk about actually making this work, or trying our best to make it work. Scrum under Waterfall is an unhappy marriage of two processes. Okay? So you kind of just have to buckle up and get satisfied with the fact that's the way it is. It's like watching your grandparents. Your grandparents clearly hated each other, but they were still married for like 50 years, right? Scrum under a waterfall. Two old people being married. It's all good. Yeah. So a lot of the reason why people do Scrum under waterfall is that it's required by contract or it's required by law. Like FAA, when they farm the work out, a lot of times they say it has to be managed with waterfall. Part of that is, one, it's a really super complicated problem, and then two, they want some feel like they have control over what's going on. Other times it's that it's the first Agile project inside of your organization. They're just like, hey, let's try this new cool thing that all the kids are talking about. What is it? Agile. And then sometimes it's just because that's the way your company wants to work. Government agencies, for example, that's the way they seem to want to do it. They want to do Agile because Agile sounds cool, and then the second that you try to actually participate in a sprint planning meeting or prioritize a backlog, it's like, wow, anyway, we got this cool thing called Microsoft Project. The hippest tool in the universe, Project. Ugh. I'm eventually going to start doing demos in Microsoft Project, so get ready for the party, kids. All right, so what we're going to try to do in order to make Scrum under Waterfall work is that we're going to leverage the strengths of each of them, because they do each have some things that are going for them. And what Mike was talking about, the Forrester guy, when he had the water Scrum fall, so you had Scrum in the middle, basically managing all the development stuff. So that's what we're going to do. So the people that are actually doing the software are going to work something really close to Scrum. It's going to be a slightly modified Scrum, but that's what we're going to do. And we're going to use it to detect the problems. So one of those big problems in a waterfall project is that everything is going just awesome until it isn't, right? Like we've probably been on projects like that before. We've been going for 6 months, and it's like, yeah, we're right on time, we're right on time, we're right on time. 6 months and 1 day, we are 2 years late. So you're going to use Scrum to hopefully figure that out. So you're going to make your same forecast about what you're going to deliver in the sprint, and if you are not able to actually deliver working software at the end of that sprint, you should ask yourself why you did not actually do that. Additionally, Scrum and Agile, we're all about test-driven development and definition of done and delivering working software. We really have to do that. So it's modified Scrum, but it's also going to be modified Agile too. You're going to try to get them to at least kind of sign off on the idea of delivering working software on 30-day or less cycle. And then, once again, what Mike from Forrester was talking about is well, Scrum has a bit of a scale problem. So if you've got a zillion teams, how do you make a zillion teams all come together? Visual Studio is a fantastic example of this. So at Microsoft, all the feature teams are all Scrum, but you've got 86 bajillion feature teams that all eventually roll up into a gigabyte MSI that you're going to run that turns into Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio on your machine. That's an awful lot of stuff to coordinate. Now, I kind of wish that I'd done the math on this, and plotted out the nodes of, if we're going to do Scrum of Scrum on, 400 teams, how much coordination would that actually take? And the answer is it would probably take more time than there is atoms in the universe, I think, at a fairly short number of team size. So what they do is they're Agile Scrum up to a certain point, and then they flip over, and then they're doing more of a waterfall project plan kind of thing to coordinate everybody. And then also, you're going to kind of do waterfall for release planning and for backlog management. So thinking about what the differences are going to be for your Scrum teams is, well, you're going to lean a little bit less on the backlog. Your backlog is going to look a lot more like that project plan, and you're going to do less prioritization because the prioritization is the order of stuff in the Microsoft project plan. Now, keep in mind, I'm still saying that this is a grumpy marriage. This is just kind of the way that you can make it work. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good idea, and the Scrum people would probably be yelling at me right now, that's totally wrong. This is how you kind of like make it a happy, this is how you make grandma and grandpa actually like each other. So there's going to be a lot less emphasis on sprint planning, and it's going to be probably just enough to figure out the forecast for what you can actually deliver inside that period of time. And then because you're so requirements document centric before Scrum even kicked off, you're probably going to have a lot less negotiation of scope on those requirements during the sprint. So maybe the product owner isn't going to be quite as engaged with the team. Probably is a good idea for them to remain engaged in the team in the same level that you would expect in a Scrum team, but questionable about whether you would actually have to do that. The rest of the stuff that's going to stay the same, definitely do that daily Scrum, definitely have a sprint goal, have some coherent idea what you're actually trying to do. So for those of you that work on Scrum teams, how many of you have a sprint goal? Sort of halfway, okay? So for those of you that meekly raised your hand about the sprint goal, how many of you would say that it's really clear, that you understand it? Yeah, not many. That sprint goal, and I've been sort of like drafting an article in the back of my head for a while. I think that the sprint goal in Scrum is one of the most important things to make Scrum really work. If the team can't understand what their sprint goal is, it's going to be very difficult for them to swarm, come together, and deliver that software inside that sprint. So hopefully, if you're doing Scrum under Waterfall, you're going to still have a sprint goal. Gives you an idea of how to actually push through the next 30 days worth of work. Definitely focus on definition of done. Define what your definition of done is. So Waterfall tends to have a problem with doneness deficit, basically all this deferred work that has to get taken care of later. If you focus on definition of done, hopefully you will not have that same problem. Do a sprint review, do the retrospective. Very important to make sure that you're demoing working software in that review, and that in the retrospective that you're thinking about what went well, what didn't go well, and coming up with actually actionable things to make it better for the next sprint. Anyone else want to weigh in on stuff that you'd think would be different or the same?
Isn't the sprint goal just to get done everything that was planned for the sprint?
Isn't the sprint goal just to get done everything that was planned for the sprint? Yeah, kind of, but how did you pick what you were going to do for the sprint in the first place?
Prioritizing.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I don't understand what you mean by sprint goal.
So the question is, what is that sprint goal really about? I've seen companies that'll basically take, okay, we're going to do these 10 PBIs, and our sprint goal is basically the combination is like string concat of the titles of all the sprint goals. Of all the PBIs we're forecasting we're going to deliver. They're not necessarily all associated in any particular way. If you can come up with a theme, like this sprint we're going to focus on user management in our security subsystem, and then all of the PBIs kind of hang off of that, then everyone's kind of working on the same stuff. So if you have a team that is forecasting they're going to deliver 10 PBIs, but they're not really related in any particular way, the risk is that your team is going to be, instead of a team, it's going to be 10 people working on 10 PBIs that all sit in the same room, as opposed to behaving like a team, swarming on that sprint goal and figuring out how to actually achieve it and deliver that working software. So, any of the Scrum org guys want to weigh in on that one? It's okay.
Yeah, I think it's also can be used as a governor for negotiation of scope. So you talk about less negotiation during the sprint, but again we're going towards forecasting, not commitment, which makes things a little more wet sand. Having a goal there and making sure that you're still accomplishing the goal can be like a governor for that.
Yeah.
Scope management, I think. Yeah, I think the other thing, kind of like what you talk about, I mean, you may have that measurable also. Like we're going to improve the performance of the security subsystem by 20%.
Sure.
Something like that. That's tangible. It doesn't mean I need to get 7 PBIs done, but not 8. It doesn't mean any of that.
Yep.
It's a tangible goal outside of that, like you say, people can rally around.
Yeah. It's good that it's understandable. And it's kind of, I feel like I'm going to use this word wrong, but in meditation, that concept of a mantra that you're repeating and you're focusing on this one thing while you're trying to meditate, it's similar inside of a sprint, that focusing on that sprint goal, everyone understands this is the direction we're pulling in, this is the thing we're trying to get done, move through it like that.
Well, isn't it
Hang on a second, you got a microphone for you.
Isn't it more towards managing risk? Because if your Scrum goal is purely to say, I'm going to deliver these 10 items which are not related,
Yep.
if any one of them doesn't get in, you fail. Whereas if you're measuring some overall goal of functionality, you can meet that goal and you can meet it on its date, and you may say, well, we missed 1 or 2 features. But in the end, your Scrum is successful. You measure something, you can deliver value.
Yeah.
In those, because the other part of Scrum is saying, or Agile, is that those features may not get in anyway.
Right.
So you can't say
Well,
that
yeah, that's a really good point. So
they get moved to the next iteration because for whatever reason, that's the hallmark of Agile.
but additionally, you could have those PBIs that you didn't get to, you didn't deliver that you forecast you would do, and when you go into sprint planning for the next sprint, there's no guarantee that those are going to be high priority on the next sprint. They could fall off the planet.
Or you move other stuff in. So
Yep.
it's the nature of the.
But I liked what you said earlier. Like it's a sort of a way of managing the risk of saying that you failed a sprint.
Right.
If you have that sprint goal there, then you can say, yeah, we achieved the overall sprint goal. We might not have nailed 10 out of 10 of the PBIs that we forecast we would do, but at least we pulled in the right direction and we've achieved some modicum of success on 20% perf improvement on security subsystem. Gary.
Why less emphasis on sprint planning?
Well,
I don't get that one.
I guess, actually, that's a really good point. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about which PBIs you're going to pull into the sprint, because you've got that product plan, and the product plan is basically like a statically ordered product backlog that goes way further than we would ever want to in a purely Scrum organization. a lot of times in that project plan, the tasks have been decomposed way ahead of time. So that how are you going to achieve the sprint goal stuff that would happen in the second half of the sprint planning meeting, we're not doing that so much anymore because it's done ahead of time. Unless you choose to do it and you choose to decompose the user stories or PBIs during it, but we're in fairly uncharted territory anyway because it's just such an uncomfortable union of those two processes. Yeah. Hang on a second. Wait for the microphone.
Going off the last point, in terms of you saying that a lot of project backlog would be already broken down so that you can just jump into it.
Yep.
I don't know what your experiences are with that. I guess mine have been that typically it hasn't been broken down by developers, and the developers doing the work. So when we get it, we might have some stuff that's a huge chunk of work,
Sure.
a small chunk of work, and from the project manager standpoint, they're the same.
You mean Scrum under Waterfall's
Yes.
world? Yeah, exactly. You still are going to be spending some time looking at what those PBIs mean, but a lot of times there is a certain amount of detail that's already there, which I guess is not too different from how you do it in just straight up Scrum too. But yeah, good point. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. So one of the big risks in Scrum under Waterfall is just that, well, how many of you have heard of the object relational impedance mismatch problem? Yeah. So in that case, it's solved by object relational mappers like nhibernate or entity framework or link to SQL, whatever you got. And the problem with that class of tooling is trying to solve is the fact that relational databases think of data in a completely different way than the objects do. So in objects, you might have this complex hierarchy of employee extends from person, extends from human or something like that. That compiles down to a single object called employee. Now, if you try to save that object graph into a relational database, you're probably going to have at least 3 tables worth of data, and they all have different relationships in them. Just the shape of the data doesn't look anything the same. We've got that same impedance mismatch in Scrum under a waterfall. Scrum thinks about how to do software in a completely different way than Waterfall does. It's going to be a certain amount of gear grinding. And a real problem is that that gear grinding can expose itself as a lack of trust. They don't get what we do, we don't get what they do, we're not really exactly telling them the full answer about stuff. They want to hear that we're on time, so we tell them that we're on time, which is a lot of why projects are perfectly on time right up until the moment that they're not. And a lot of that is that we're kind of have the risk of keeping 2 sets of books. So we, on the Agile Scrum side, manage our work in one particular way, and then on the Waterfall side, they have it in a completely other way. And so there's a lot of waste that could potentially be happening if you're managing 2 sets of books, the Agile set and the Waterfall set. And then it's also a huge lack of transparency problem. So now we've got this communication problem that sets up more lack of trust and yada, 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 and it's bad. And then another risk of Scrum under Waterfall, and this is a risk in Scrum period, is the idea of using the Burndown chart for evil. Has anyone other than the Scrum trainers in the room heard of that before? So if you're looking at the Burndown chart, which you would still probably want to have if you're an Agile team under Waterfall, you've got this nice ideal trend line for where you're supposed to be in your sprint. So this particular one, you spend most of the time under that line, so you're ahead of schedule. It doesn't usually look that way, does it? Usually, at least for a while, we're on top of that ideal trend line and we're out for a little while and then maybe it corrects. So the problem of using the Burndown for evil is when you have a manager that comes in and says, I want to look at the Burndown chart. How are you guys doing? And they see that it's way out and they panic. And they start yelling at you and say, why is this not on track? How come you're not on da 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 da? And in Agile, it's just kind of like, it's just data for us. We just know, the team just knows, okay, well, we have to tune this. We're a little hot right now. Let's dial it back the other direction. But if you have a management structure that is staring at this burndown chart and they are expecting you to hit that line all the way through, in order to make them go away, you are going to do the math to tune it so that you're always right in that line. And that's another one of those running two sets of books problems, right? Because if you're tuning it so that you're exactly on top of that line, it's probably BS, right? You know, reality is that we're getting off that line fairly frequently. So it's an example of how managers can potentially work against the best interests of themselves and the team by forcing them to follow this line and not being completely transparent with what their status really is. So watch out for that. So I talked about our grandparents that hate each other after 50 years of marriage. Making Scrum under Waterfall work is a lot like making peace between them. It's kind of like relationship therapy. And actually, that's kind of how I think of a lot of what I do in my career. So when I work with teams, and I do Scrum coaching and Scrum training, so much of it is just working on the psychology of the teams. Like, what's the problem? Why do they not work together? Why do they hate each other? What's really going on here? But in Scrum under Waterfall, because you've got that impedance mismatch between the two processes, you're going to have it even more. So if you're going to make it work, you have to get past a few things. So one of the things that's going to be really important is to at least acknowledge the fact that changes in Agile is a feature where Waterfall thinks of schedule slips as bugs. And you kind of have to get that out and say, look, we're going to change a lot. Don't expect me to hit these dates. I'm going to try to hit these dates, but it's not in your best interest to think that they're carved in stone. Try to watch what I'm doing. Try to watch the empirical data that's coming out of the team and tune appropriately. Another one is the earned value problem. So the phenomenon of being a percentage done on a task. It's like, how you doing on that suite of stored procedures? Oh, I'm 80% done. 2 weeks later, where are you on that task? I'm 80% done. So the first 80% of any task takes about 20% of the time, and the remaining 20% takes 80% of the time. So earned value, super popular in Waterfall. You probably don't want to do that. You want to say, is it done or is it not done? Right? Because once again, this is another one of these cases where you can leave yourself open to everything's going great right up until it isn't. Okay? And it's all about transparency. Bottom line, or better yet, bottom bullet. Transparency is the key for all of this. You have to make sure you're communicating openly and honestly with your Waterfall masters, and that they, in turn, are communicating accurately to you. All right. TFS to the rescue. How many of you use Team Foundation Server? That is what I like to see. Give yourselves a round of applause. Yay. Git sucks. No. Wow, that's a good way to start some hatred. It's like, I can just see it on Twitter. It's like, Ben Day says, Git sucks. Rain of fury comes down on at Ben Day on Twitter. Good times. Yeah, man. I had a blog debacle a couple years ago where I did something stupid and the entire open source community decided, wow, I really hate that guy. And it was like my blog used to get, let's say, I'd be lucky if I got 100 reads on one of my posts. And on this one post, it suddenly went, I did 8,500 reads inside of 24 hours. I was like, that's scary. It was extra scary because people were reading, saying really nasty things about me on Reddit. And then eventually people started coming to my rescue, but it was a very stressful couple of days. So I'm very aware of the hatred and the fury that can come from the open source community. Anyway, Team Foundation Server is awesome. In case you don't know about it, for those of you who didn't raise your hand or didn't know, it's the center of the Visual Studio universe. It does requirements management, project planning stuff, version control, automated build, reporting, test case management. There's a bunch of QA tools that plug into that stuff. Actually, this is curious on this too. How many of you have heard of Microsoft Test Manager? Okay. How many of you use Microsoft Test Manager? Okay. So just so you know, Microsoft Test Manager exists. It is out there. It's a really cool tool. It's for QA testing. It helps automate the QA process. Y'all should go check it out. Y'all, what am I, Southern? I'm from Massachusetts. What's happening to me? And then there's also a lab management piece, so it plugs into Hyper-V virtualization, so you can spin up virtual test environments, including, one of my favorite things is you can have a QA person testing a suite of VMs in Microsoft Test Manager. They find a bug, and then they can attach a snapshot of the virtual environment to the TFS bug work item, so that when you actually come back and work on that bug as a developer, you go to the attachments page, double-click on snapshot of the virtual environment, it spins up the virtual environment for you, and then basically you are sitting on that same box that the QA person was testing on, and it appears that it's just how they left it when they recorded that bug not 30 seconds earlier. So it's really, I'm a fan. I'm kind of a fan of Microsoft stuff. I know it makes, I'm wrong, whatever. So another part of this is Microsoft Project Server. So Microsoft Project Server integrates, as you might guess, into Microsoft Project, and it's an enterprise project management solution. So where TFS is really very Agile-centric, Project Server is all about doing that waterfall stuff and doing it really well. So managing portfolios of projects, doing demand management, doing workflows for approval, all kinds of fun stuff like that. So if you're in that waterfall zone, that's the tool for you. It's a plug-in to SharePoint, and you can access it through a web interface or through Microsoft Project itself. And the way that this is going to help you out is that there's this nice integration called the TFS Project Server Feature Pack that will do bidirectional sync between Project Server and TFS. And remember I was talking about not having two sets of books. This is what allows you to not have two sets of books. This is what allows you to communicate openly and honestly about what's going on. So that's one of the nice things about Team Foundation Server or any of these other sort of work tracking systems is that if you run your project out of that, the data is just the data. There's not an emotional charge to it. It's not like, well, you told me it was 8 hours. It's like, no, it says 8 hours there, and it said that there are this many defects that are attached to it. There's an emotional detachment that comes from being able to track your work out of TFS or Project Server. This will sync it up so that each team, so the waterfall team is going to want to work in their tools, or the PMO, Project Management Organization, wants to work in their tools. And we on the development side are going to want to work in our tools, Visual Studio, basically Visual Studio or Eclipse. This will do that sync back and forth. So a way that it might work is that you can come into Project Server, create a bunch of stuff in a project plan, save it back to the server, and then there's going to be this synchronization engine that's running in the background that'll publish those changes back in the Team Foundation Server. So thinking about, this is a demo I'm going to do in a few minutes, you might come through as a Project Server person, come up with a list of requirements, plug that into your project plan, and then say to the team, hey, could you go task out these user stories? The team then goes into Team Foundation Server, opens it up either in Team Explorer or opens it up in Excel, adds the tasks into there, saves it back, and now it gets published back to the enterprise project plan in Project Server. So you get this nice sync back and forth, so it's not like you're having to go and work a ton inside of Microsoft Project unless you really, really want to. Okay? Anyone using this today? Anyone using Project Server today? Okay. How's Project Server working out for you? Are you happy with it?
We're still at 2003.
Awesome. So you really like the 2003 version?
No, we're in the upgrade rate.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's do a quick demo. I've been talking for close to an hour about this stuff. Let's show you some actual stuff. So let me know if you can't see. Oh, this is trimming the screen. How badly is that? If I maximize this, how badly? Yeah, it trims it off pretty badly. All right, so this is the web portal for Microsoft Project Server. And if I click in here, I've got Project Center, and this will show me a list of what are known as enterprise project plans that exist in Project Server. So one of the big things that Project Server tries to solve is this idea of managing a portfolio of different projects. So if you work at a very large company, you've got probably a lot of projects that are running simultaneously. How do you figure out what the health is on all of those, and how are they staffed? Are there resources at your company that is not being used appropriately? This tries to help you out with that. So in this case, I actually have a master enterprise plan, and there are some sub-projects. And I'll click into Product ABC. Brings up a web interface version of Microsoft Project, and we've got some stuff in here. But what I really want to do is I want to edit this in Project Professional, so we can bring up Microsoft Project. And while we're waiting for this to load, who here is red-green colorblind? Only me? I'm the only colorblind American in this room. That is statistically impossible. All right, my point is not very interesting. This icon for PowerPoint looks exactly the same as this icon for Microsoft Project to me. I cannot tell the difference. I was in a meeting at Microsoft when we were talking about some of this stuff, and I said, wow, I think that's really bizarre that PowerPoint and Project Server use exactly the same icon. And they looked at me like I was the dumbest person they had ever seen. We're paying you to do work for us? This is ridiculous. You're fired. Anyway, red-green colorblind. Not interesting. Let's move on. All right, so we've got our enterprise project plan loaded up inside of Microsoft Project. Job failed. That's not what I like to see when I'm on stage. So let's come in here and let's add a couple of requirements. Let's say online pizza ordering, air traffic control, coin-operated laundry. So we've got those guys right there, and let's see, can you still see that? So we've got a handful of things we've plugged in here. We don't really know what the duration is going to be on them, but we do know that we want to have this spec'd out by our team. So we've got this column here called Publish to Team Project. So if it's set to yes, it's going to get published back to Team Foundation Server. So this is the beginning of how we actually integrate back into TFS. So we'll say yes on all these guys. Say yes, we'll say yes, and we'll say yes. And let's assign all of them to product owner. And actually, I want to change this to project server. So I also have to set what the work item type is going to be. And this is tied back to an Agile team project. So it's going to be a user story for these requirements. So I say user story on this. And that looks pretty good right there. So come into the file menu, and we'll go to the publish. Did it publish it? It is working on it. Let me hit it again just to make sure. Okay, so this has published it back to Project Server. So if I close this out, it should be pretty happy. Yep, I'll check in that project plan. And if we refresh this guy, hopefully we will see those tasks show up. Yes. So we've got those 3 right there. So this is the process of Waterfall people saying, here are some things I would like you to go spec out. Participate with me in the estimation process. So let's come over to our TFS project. So this is connected to Project Server. So let's create just quickly a quick work item query. And let's bring back a tree of work items and anything at the top that is a user story, bring that back. And then I can't get to that. Wow, this is a little hard to do.
You can flip the tab out.
Good thinking. 2 points for the guy. I still can't see my... Let's see if it'll work anyway. Okay, good enough. So it's published it back to Team Foundation Server. So now we're viewing it in TFS, and we've got the 3 new user stories we're supposed to go spec out. And if we double click into them, we're going to see that we have a separate tab here. Let's mount this back in. So there's now a Project Server tab on our work item. So one of the things that it's going to show us is it supposed to sync with Project Server? Yes. And then what's the enterprise project plan in Project Server that it's supposed to sync to? And then you have a bunch of status information. And thankfully, it actually says success. It stinks when you do this demo, and then it says no, error. I'm like, oh, God. So we've got that right there. And let's just use our tool the way we're used to doing it. So let's come in here and let's edit. Let's task this out using Excel. Come into Excel, and we've got these items right here. And let's do the online pizza ordering one. So we'll say add child, and let's say initial design. And let's add another one. Database design. And we'll do another one, which is implementation. So these guys will be tasks. And just for giggles, let's assign them to some people. I know I said that that's a worst practice, but it's a demo, so we can be evil if we want to. And then we need to add a couple of extra columns so that we can sync it back to Project Server. So let's do original estimate, or remaining work. And we'll do Project Server, Enterprise Project, and Project Server Submit. So let's hook these up. So these things are also going back to the product ABC Enterprise Project Plan. We'll send that back. And let's add some actual estimates for this work. So let's say that this is 40 hours. And let's say the database design is 20. And then 10 hours for, well, let's give it 8 for the initial design. And then we'll say, yes, we do want to submit this back to Project Server. Do that, publish it back to Team Foundation Server, and now it's going to automatically pick that up and send it back to Project Server. So if we come over here, let's open up our Product ABC Enterprise Project Plan. We should, hopefully, get a handful of new work items for, and we don't. Perfect. Try it one more time. Okay, here we go. I was just a little too fast. So now we've got some nice stuff in here so we can start planning out predecessors if we want to, and dependencies between them. And we see right now that the online pizza ordering requirement is set to take 5 days, mostly because the implementation is set to be 5 days. But you can't necessarily do that. There's a certain order these things have to go in. So let's say that the database design depends on initial design, and the implementation depends on database design. So it automatically goes and pushes out some of these dates for us, and now our online pizza ordering is rolling up to be 6 days worth of work. So we got that all taken care of. We basically let's pretend that we've edited it the way we want. I don't want to print, I want to publish it back, and now if we were to go open these things up in TFS, we're going to see that there are now dates attached to that task work item that reflects what we just did inside a project server. So this gives us the ability to go back and forth and let the tool handle that impedance mismatch as opposed to us doing it, and we don't have to do 2 sets of books. We work in whatever tool we want to. The synchronization takes care of moving the data back and forth. Questions on this stuff? All right, so while we're... Say again? I'm using the Agile template right now. So it's hooked up to that. Yep. All right, let's go into the next part of the demo. So far what I've done, actually let's do a little bit more. So,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What happens if you forget the columns? So they're already created.
Yep.
You pull them back, and do they stay added, or do you need to re-add them every time?
So my question was, what happens if you export it to Excel, you add your columns, you sync it, but then you do another export.
Yeah.
Those columns stay there, or do you need to re-add them every time? What happens if you forget?
So on the Microsoft project side, they get added in and they stay in. On the Excel side, unless you save that Excel worksheet down, or unless you base that worksheet on a work item query that has those columns in it, then you're it. So the way to fix it really is to create a work item query that has those columns by default, and then you don't lose it. So let's come back here, let's refresh that, and let's look at online pizza ordering. Let's look at links. We've got a bunch of different child tasks that show up related to that. So let's go and let's say that we get into this and we figure out that our implementation isn't going to take 40 hours, it's going to take 80. Do that, save it back. Next time that project manager opens up their project plan, they're going to see that that date has changed and it's going to adjust the dates accordingly. So you'll be able to push information into the waterfall people a little bit more easily. Now, that's not necessarily how all people want to work. So I have a second enterprise project plan. So the way that I just did that, it just went back to project server without any kind of approval, without any notifications that it actually happened. Not all waterfall project managers are going to work that way. So what Microsoft Project Server will do if you don't want to work that way is you can turn on approvals. So let's go and do a slightly different version of that same demo. Open up the plan for product XYZ. It's been checked out to you, which is modified on the server. Yeah, I want to load latest. All right, so let's go in and, we've got a handful of things that are already in here. We've got, awesome. So project server is stable. Let's try that one more time. I have a feeling it's going to crash again. Why? Okay, so we've got a handful of things that we've already defined for tasks. Let's come in here. Let's go back over to TFS and let's edit to work item 42. So we've got this remaining work, which is 192 hours, which is a little bit high. You generally want to have them be a little smaller than that. But let's say that we've figured out that it's going to take even longer. So let's make this 240 hours, save it back. This has now gone back up to Project Server. So if we come over to our Project Server window again, we can go to the Approval Center. Come on, Approval Center. And we see that there's a status update on a task. Like, okay, what's up with this? So it doesn't automatically populate the project plan. We have an opportunity to at least know what's going on and reject it if we want to. So we look at it, and we're like, yep, that looks pretty much like something. We'll highlight it, and we'll say accept. Let's give it a comment. Yep, I'm glad you're late. Take all the time you need. Signed, the not real life project manager. Save that back. And now that's been approved, that's gone back in, it's now part of the project plan. So that's really helpful if you have to, schedules are going to slip all the time in Agile. If you need to communicate that up, but you want to make sure you don't forget to tell somebody, an approval process, an approval workflow is really helpful for doing that. All right, and then one last demo about resource planning. So let's open up ABC again. Got my notes here just to make sure I don't forget something. So one of the things we can do is leverage some of the nice stuff that Project Server does. And let's go look at resource usage. Or actually, wrong one. Team Planner. So we see that we have a number of different people on our team, which we can actually modify our teams by coming in here and say build team from enterprise. And right now we've got a whole bunch of people on here, including my wife, and well, she's getting booted from the team. She's like, thank you, I didn't want to work on online pizza ordering anyway. So we've got all of these people that are on our project, and now we can sort of see, all right, what's everyone working on? So if we scroll over, we can see that eventually we will see that the developer number 1 is super, super busy with stuff. Here we go. And demo developer 2 and 3 have nothing going on. So one of the things we can do is we just drag and drop stuff in. Let's say that this person's going to do the implementation. Made that change, publish it back. Now we've round-tripped all that same stuff. Okay? So if you have to do that pre-assigned task and you have to do resource pool management, this is a good tool for having to do that. And it just automatically goes back and syncs up with Team Foundation Server again. Any questions on this stuff? Cool. So, big win on this is that both groups get to stay in the tools that they like to work in. They get to work in their preferred tools. And it makes sure that everything is transparent. So you're not managing 2 sets of books. You edit stuff in Team Foundation Server, it just sort of appears in Project Server and vice versa. Everyone has this shared understanding, this shared view of what's going on in the project, ideally. And it's a little easier to get that trust working in between the 2 teams. I pretty much said all that stuff. So keep in mind that, well, actually, before I bail out of this, let me fast forward to one slide. So there's one thing that I think with a lot of organizations that are doing Scrum under Waterfall, or that think they have to, is that a lot of organizations are too quick to go for plan-driven development. Now, I do a lot of work in financial services, and one of the things that I've seen a zillion times over is that financial services companies tend to use Waterfall in a lot of process where it's convenient to them. And the places where it's not convenient, they don't have any process. So thinking of like hedge funds or whatever, they've got all kinds of reports and Excel spreadsheets and applications with financial models that they use to manage the billions of dollars that they have under investment and make some pretty big trades on these. I have seen not a single organization that has any kind of process around those Excel spreadsheets. They basically, the traders say, I need to change now. And they go, okay, and they edit it pretty much live against production, and they send it in. There's no QA, there's no requirements gathering, there's no nothing. It's just live. And then I think about another financial services company that I work with, and I am heavily involved in an application that has a disaster recovery priority of like Z, 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 Z. Like, it is literally the lowest priority application that they have in the entire organization. Makes me feel really good about myself. I work on a super low priority app. When you have to push a bug fix for that, it literally takes 2 weeks, at least, to get the bug fix done for something that is super low priority. So on one side, you've got stuff that is making them bajillions of dollars, no process at all. And on the other side, you've got something it's helping, but it's not super mission critical, and they do tons and tons and tons of process on top of that. And a lot of it is that I think that Waterfall is kind of like that no one got fired for choosing IBM problem. Agile, in a lot of organizations, still feels really new. So if you can do it, if you're working with a company that is thinking about doing Scrum under Waterfall, ask them, do they really, really need that level of management and that level of control? Because it is some extra overhead. So on that note, any last questions? Cool. Oh, Chad, bring it on.
So in Agile organizations, a lot of what makes it work is trust. And you talked about trust and transparency.
Yeah.
A lot of waterfall culture, very little trust exists. What ideas do you have on bridging that gap from trust and transparency, or getting to transparency via trust using this technique?
That's a pretty good question. Anyway, thanks very much. Well, I really think that not having two sets of books things is incredibly important, and that I am a TFS guy, so I am biased, but I really like the idea that it's super easy for developers to record information, and same thing for the Waterfall people to record the information, and it all sort of shows up in this repository that doesn't take a lot of human involvement. So a lot of it is just depersonalizing it so that you get to, I think what I have a note over here is just the facts, ma'am. If you can get to that point where you're just, is it in source control? What is the bug number on this thing? It's just there. It becomes less of a human overload kind of thing that your parents are going to argue, your grandparents are going to argue about. Oh, you overcooked the broccoli again, kind of thing. Like, it goes in there, they look at it, everyone sees the same stuff. Less arguing. I don't know, what do you think? Does that just sound like absolute BS? Yeah, I like how, like I said, it looked like absolute BS, and then everyone's hands shot up. It's like, great. Who let this guy into the conference? Yeah.
My question is around the realities. I think we all face certain realities in our daily life.
Yeah.
And I will say I'm a sort of a waterfall guy, running into Agile. And I see these working on environments where you need to face certain realities, like investments, like co-located teams that are not really there, outsourcing. So how does a pure Agile environment actually face those realities that we have to live with regardless of what we say on the textbook?
Well, that the non-co-located team, the geographically distributed team problem is a really big deal for Scrum. I actually just lost some business with a major financial organization because they called me up and they're like, our big problem is that our teams that are doing the work are in India, and that the people that are coming up with the specs, the project managers, are all New Hampshire. So East Coast time versus India time, they're barely awake at the same hours of the day. So if you think about what Scrum needs, you need that constant ability to like go back and forth and discuss what the scope is, discuss what this PBI actually means, discuss what is really required, all that kind of stuff. And I basically told them that you can't do that. It's not going to work. It is just instantaneously going to fail. So that might actually be one of those cases where you have to go a little bit heavier on the requirement side in order to make that work. It then becomes sort of a question of like, well, is that really Scrum or not? But I don't know. What do you think? Is that?
Well, the point is that at least on my environment, and I'm pretty sure some of our environments, that's the reality. We don't really have that, I will call it a luxury of having the developer next to me so I can talk to that person every day. Or even worse, the customer for that application actually sits somewhere else, and that person may be actually quite busy producing revenue. Sure. So they're saying, this is what I need, I hope you understand. Let me get producing revenue. You deal with the developer who's actually in India.
Yeah.
So that's what introduced a level of bureaucracy that we hope Agile can reduce, but sometimes in practice is elusive.
Well, that's part of why I was saying that Scrum under Waterfall is an unhappy marriage, but it's a reality. It's out there. It's not perfect. The stuff that you've described I would definitely look at that and say, these are impediments to you as a high-performing organization. But if that's the way it's got to be, if you have some sort of a requirement from the top that says, thou shalt use a team in India that is not in your time zone, what are you going to do? You can just walk away, or are you going to make the best of it? So.
I'm not sure if you're making that a Scrum problem.
Oh, it's not a Scrum problem. That's just an organizational problem.
Yeah, any methodology is going to feel the pain if your people can't talk to your other.
Yeah, right.
It's not a Scrum problem.
Yeah. There was a question over here.
I actually recently participated in a project, a truly agile project, and the development team was in Australia. And I think it's going back to, it's the people that make it agile more than the process. So if everybody in the team is driving towards it and working towards finding a common time where everybody actually wants to make it work, we just met every day for 15 minutes, and we were on IM, so I mean, only if something they really needed to talk, something like a quick question. So I never felt that they were far away, and they never felt that I was far away. So it's like, it's all about people in the end. That's what I feel. This project was a huge success, and I never thought that the timing was an issue.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.